Welcome, everyone. My name is Maureen Antunes, president of the Spark Computer Graphics Society and the Vancouver ACM SIGGRAPH chapter. Very, very excited to welcome you to this very special webinar. I'm very pleased to have with us today five-time Academy Award nominated filmmaker Richard Linklater and a filmmaker, Mr. Tommy Pallotta. And Richard and Tommy have recently released, well, not recently, but sort of recently released Apollo 10.5, A Space Age Childhood, which is now streaming on Netflix. And we're very excited to speak with you both about the making of the film. But I wanted to turn back the clock a little bit because I get the sense that this is kind of the culmination of your work together over the course of 20 some odd years. And so I wanted to rewind the clock a little bit to your working relationship and starting with Waking Life, because it all kind of started there. Both you're working together and Richard, for you, making animation. So can we talk a little bit about how Waking Life sort of came to be for those that may not know the history behind the movie and your working relationship?
Well, for Tommy and I, it actually started 10 years before that, exactly 10 years, summer of '89, when Tommy was just out of college and a PA. Or were you out of college, Tommy? I don't know.
I quit college at the time. I was just doing nothing.
You can take it from your perspective.
Out of college, meaning not going.
I'd been out of college for a while. Anyway, I was making a film, Slacker, and Tommy ended up, he was a PA on it. And like anyone anywhere near that production, they got pulled into it to be a cast member. So that's where we first really got to know one another. And, we're both making movies over that time and keeping up with what each other were doing. And Tommy and a friend were kind of developing this really interesting to me looking process, of kind of a computer-based variant of rotoscoping, doing these shorts and stuff. So I got interested in that and thought, oh, there's this film I've been thinking about for 20 years. Even before I was a filmmaker, I was thinking about it as a story, and it doesn't work, in my head. But if it looks like that, maybe it works. So I got interested. It was a nice kind of, I don't know, convergence of ideas and stories and technology. And I don't know, what do you think about that time, Tommy? It was kind of a wonderful convergence, I felt.
Well, it was also sort of the birth of the whole the technology sort of explosion that was happening in like the late 90s, the .com stuff that was going on. It was a very exciting time for digital tools and storytelling. And, I don't think it's an accident when I started working with Rick, it was the first time I sort of thought that it was possible to tell stories and make a living. And if he didn't live in New York or LA, Rick was a normal guy living in Texas, and he was able to tell stories that people were watching and being engaged. But I was very much influenced by Rick's storytelling. And so when I went into animation, it was really a much more naturalistic approach to animation. The first animations were documentary animation. So I would just interview people and take that sort of conversations that may have been banal to most if it was just video, but then when we illustrated and brought a sort of creative element to it, it gave it a new context and made it more entertaining. And I think that really came from it was an offshoot of what Rick was doing at that time, just sort of very visually, but also kind of approaching the sort of naturalistic storytelling. And so I think it melded really well with what Rick was doing because of that.
And touching on that, Tommy, I'm curious because you didn't go to school for technology, but you end up working with Rick to develop this completely new way of doing animation. How did that even start?
Well, I studied philosophy, which at its very core is problem solving, and it helps you sort of to think critically. And I think although I've never used that in my like as a job, it's really great for life. And production is kind of just a series of problems that you have to solve. And I just always felt very comfortable with technology. I mean, I have a very interesting relationship with it. I'm very critical of it, but it is something that felt very intuitive to me from the very beginning. I would say like the very first time I got on a computer or got on the internet, I kind of, I understood it. So I veered towards that. And honestly, after Rick came out with Slacker, there's a whole sort of indie film explosion. There was Quentin Tarantino, Robert Rodriguez, a bunch of these people. And by the time I was sort of making my own films, I sort of thought, well, that story's kind of been told, the sort of the person who does a low budget feature that gets out. I was aware that that story only plays so many times.
Mhm.
And part of my mind was like, okay, you have to do something different, something that people have never seen before. And my thought was, if you show things that people have never seen, then you can find that audience. And so that was just one of the original sort of ideas behind it.
I mean, I did rewatch Waking Life. It feels almost like a waking dream. The animation, the animation is a little bit rough, but it works for the storytelling. And it's 20 some odd years old now, but it's still it still does the trick.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm always looking to make things that'll kind of last, and things that won't date, and I'm not that consciously, but to me, and when we made that movie, it was a 20-year-old idea I had based on a dream I had in high school. That was this multi-level. I kept waking up and finding I was in a dream, and I just thought that was the ultimate story, to dream films. Films are very close to dreams anyway. I think they always have been. So I wanted to take that on as a subject itself. The film, I haven't seen it in a long time, but it's very much about lucid dreaming. It's almost a how-to manual. It takes on dreams on a lot of different levels. So I think that's pretty perpetual. Humans are not going to quit dreaming. So anyone who wants to kind of go there and be intrigued, and I don't know, I love all those people in the dreams. They're very, although we're all dream characters, perhaps there's an individualistic streak to all of them. And we like that we could use different styles per scene, even the main character is kind of changing his look depending on the scene. So that was our way of, I just thought I'd never seen anything like that, it was a fun idea. Like, oh, every kind of vignette, every scene will have its own individuality, like each character. It'll be different than the one before. They won't all feel like they're in one design. They're all in one film or one dream or multiple dreams, but they're they're individuals within that. And we felt that way about all our animators. They could express their own individual style. We weren't telling them via style sheets how to draw. So we embraced that and kind of went with it. And I think audiences did too. It's just, like Tommy was saying, it's just something you hadn't seen before.
So how did Waking Life play into A Scanner Darkly, which was a completely different experience, where now you did have to have sort of like a cohesive vision, because you're telling this very, this different story.
Telling a story, but again, a kind of dreamy, and Waking Life is dreams, and Scanner is, drugs, it's it's addiction, it's its own stories, but with those very specific characters. So I think it just had a different demand. We did have those style sheets, we did have ways to draw the different actors. It was tighter like that, and we're telling a very specific story. So, but for the same reason, I thought Waking Life should look the way it did. I thought Scanner should look that way. It puts the viewer's brain into a certain place that I feel was the best place to take on that story. Live action is pretty literal, pretty, I thought, I don't know. I always liked the way my perceiving head felt looking at this animation. And I thought, oh, I could feel it conflicted about whether it was real or not, hearing the voices and seeing human gestures that felt very real, that you don't get in most animation. When you're animating, it's hard to capture actual human movement. They don't even try. It's, caricatured and stuff, but I mean, they do try, but this was so real. I thought, okay, that messes with your brain in a good way. That fits that story.
I'm curious, did that project come about after making Waking Life because you kind of saw a way
Oh
to
yeah.
say it could be done?
Yeah, Waking Life certainly had its fans. And yeah, it was a little, a few years later or whatever. I was just talking, I was in a meeting and I was like, I get this, like the Philip K. Dick book, Scanner Darkly, which had been actually suggested to me. I hadn't read it, but Wiley Wiggins, the star of Waking Life, the main young man, he had talked about it. That's where I first got turned on to that particular book. I'd read some other Philip K. Dick, but and it just sort of happened from there. It's low budget, we got it made, but yeah, it definitely grew out of that. It was but at the end of that, Tommy, you can jump in here. It was just like we kind of felt like, okay, we've done the rotoscope thing. That's
Well,
we left it all on the field, as they say in sports. I think we're done with that for now. What's going to be next? We got to do something else.
and also this the notion that we create a sort of a technique and an approach to an individual story. All these different stories have different needs. And the great thing about, animation is that you can really tailor to those needs for that story in a way. And especially, like you said, these stories are very subjective. They're about subjective realities. And I think animation is a wonderful way to present subjective reality to an audience. I feel like it can really get you into a mindset or perspective in a way that live action struggles with sometimes.
Tommy, going into A Scanner Darkly, did you foresee that there would be difficulties with the technology that you had and where it needed to be pushed in order to get the film made?
Not really. I mean, I think it's always that blind leap of faith whenever you start into production. You don't really sort of, it would be dangerous if you thought about all the things that could go wrong, because then you don't go into production. You sort of just jump in and all productions are different. They're very difficult to predict, and you just have to be prepared and expect to just sort of go with the flow, because pretty soon it becomes its own thing. So it was more difficult for us than Waking Life, but Waking Life was one of those oddly, unusually frictionless productions from beginning to end. At least that's the way I remember it. What do you think, Rick? Like, I don't remember.
Yeah, it was so no budget,
Yeah.
it was so low budget, and it
Yeah.
was so just us in my office kind of thing.
Yeah.
And we didn't have no one was over our shoulder. We didn't know if anyone
No one
would
knew.
see the movie.
There's no expectations on us.
Zero expectations. I was kind of back to one in filmmaking. I don't know. I felt like I was making Slacker again 10 years later, just really off the grid indie film that no one might see. But for Scanner, we were Warner Independent. We were already in the industry a little closer. Not that they were breathing down our necks. I do not remember that. But I think there was more of a schedule. Maybe that was it. There was a schedule for animation. Like Waking Life is like, well, we'll be done when we're done. Warner Brothers is like, well, we're thinking this, it's like, no one's going to just hand you a blank check. It's like, okay, what's your budget? What's your schedule? Are you on schedule? That kind of thing. So yeah, a little more pressure.
And we had Keanu, so that sort of raised the profile.
That's true. We had Keanu, Robert Downey Jr., Winona, Woody. It was there was some kind of expectation.
Well, the movie holds up really well as well. There's a theme here. So let's talk about Apollo 10.5. So Richard, when do you get the idea for this project? Because clearly ideas percolate for a period of time with you before you actually start production. So how did this kind of start and when?
Well, to be honest, the idea for Apollo predates somewhere between Waking Life and Scanner. I had this idea of remembering being a kid living in the suburbs of Houston near NASA, and started to think, maybe that's my story to tell, to be how exciting that was. The space program, the farther we get from the Apollo missions, they loom larger because they were the end of this fantastic kind of shortened run we had in the space program, culminating in walking on the moon. We all thought we'd be back many times, and we'd honeymoon on the moon, would be on Mars by now, all that, but that never happened. So that became even bigger and bigger. The achievement of it to me seemed even larger than it had been at the time, because it just hadn't been replicated by anyone. So, but I was thinking, God, it's so interesting to see it from a kid perspective. I just wanted to, there've been so many astronaut movies and Apollo movies. I'm like, let's do it from like the public, a bottom up view of it. So that's what I was thinking about all those years, kind of melding the actual mission of Apollo 11 with a kid perspective, you know, and, you know, just what it was like to be alive then. And this fantasy, this kind of goofy fantasy I had as a first grader. So to kind of be a historical document about it and, you know, historical critique maybe. So that's just years spinning around in my brain. I was doing more and more research on it and eventually had a script. And it wasn't until then, because I was thinking live action initially, like I always do. But I'm so grateful that I have animation, that I understand animation and feel like it's a storytelling color on my palette. You know, it's like, oh, and it eventually dawned on me like, oh no, Apollo, for those same reasons, it's a memory, it's a fantasy, it's a weird, you know, I think it'll work animation. I thought it'd be very cool animation. And Tommy and I had developed about 10 years before, about 10 years ago, we had a little development money to, it was a feature I was maybe going to do, and it had a big animation element to it. And so we kind of we were further developing the technique, I would say. Tommy was doing all this stuff and we just got to further it with some resources. That film never got made, but I felt the animation style we had worked on was going to a new level, you know, with 2D and 3D elements, and the rotoscoping was just kind of the only thing left, was strictly the, you know, performance capture element of it. So it just seemed exciting. And, you know, Tommy had taken that and, you know, he was doing some interesting things. So naturally I sent him the script and said, what do you think? And it was like, yeah, let's do this animated. And then we got lucky. Netflix came aboard and wanted to do it also in their low budget way. They have different levels. They said, you're this third tier animation. I was like, hey, fine. They knew we were kind of in a slightly, but I said, you know, I think we're a pretty family friendly movie, but we were in kind of the low budget category, which is fine with me. I'm used to that. So yeah, we got to go. We got to run with it. We did.
So tell me, what was your thought when you see this script and this story idea?
Well, Rick had been talking to me about the project over the years, and we both grew up in the exact same area. We went to the same elementary, not at the same time, but so there's a familiarity with the story in terms of growing up near NASA and all that stuff. And so, of course, I was very excited about it. But you know, we talk about stories, and I don't sit there every time and go like, well, let's make it animated. You know, I sort of wait for the right thing, and Rick has to really sort of, you know, if it's his script, it's his call on all that stuff. But I mean, I secretly had been hoping that that it would become something like that. And so, of course, when he did call me about it, I read it, and I was just like, yeah, absolutely. I mean, I also intuitively, whenever my first question to everything is, or my first response to everything is always no. Like, should this be animated? No. And so I have to really find out, or it has to be very clear, like, why does this need to be animated? And when I read the script, it was pretty clear to me how it could really benefit from the animation portion of it, for many of the reasons that we already talked about. Really, the sort of subjective thing, instead of the drugs or dreams, here it's memory. So it really made sense to me, and again, I was excited by it, and I always enjoy, you know, I do animation, you know, on my own and with other people as well, but I just always enjoy the collaboration with Rick as well. So it's always a pleasure to do that.
I read somewhere that the team had put out a call for submissions of material to sort of capture the feeling of the period. So like
Yeah.
films and photos of
Oh yeah.
the area. And I think that that's so fascinating. How important was it? I mean, clearly it's a personal story, but you also wanted to make sure you captured the sort of the reality of what it was like in the area. But it's like it's a dream reality, right? Because it's everybody sort of shared that time period, or a group of people shared that time period,
Yeah, it's
all
like
with their own personality.
it's a cultural memory when
Hmm.
you're talking about a time and a place. It's very geographically specific. So it was really fun to float out that notion in the Houston area. Say, hey, anyone who has any, kind of scrapbook photos or home movies, and we transferred a lot of people's home movies. Like, we'll give you back a DVD if you give us your home movies. And so we did a lot of that, and we got a lot of images because what we needed was archival images to fill in something for the animators. I wanted to be able to point, okay, that's what the housing division looked like, flat. And, you got to communicate something. So it's in a situation like this, you want to communicate images. So we ended up with home movies and pictures. And I mean, there's a lot of published pictures we used and all that. We're doing a lot of archival research, not to mention a ton of NASA research. And we were getting archives from all the news sources, and we just hit it pretty thoroughly everywhere. But it was fun to include people's home movies and photos, family photos, so it felt like a community reconstruction, because the world we were doing, there's no Astroworld anymore. There's no, that's been torn down a long time ago. It's like we were recreating a world that really no longer exists. So that was just one contributing factor.
And a lot of that archive ended up informing and influencing the final animation as well, because the look of that, we started talking about the Kodachrome being a huge influence on the film, the way the colors look, but even just the grain at that time, or even the aspect ratios are constantly changing within the movie to sort of fit these imperfect and different types of media coming in. So we really took this whole notion of scrapbook influencing memory. Like we talked a lot about how our most vivid memories are the things you usually have pictures of, for instance, and how you sort of build around that. So it was really nice to just sort of see that and see how imperfect they all were, and and what we were able to do with the animation is sort of smooth that out and create a sort of cohesive reality, but then allow us all these different types of looks.
Because even over the years when I thought live action, I still had kind of documentary elements, maybe in the storytelling. That was going to be the kind of weird thing, to have a documentary sort of melding with this personal story. So we just went with that in the animation. It's like, you don't see many animated films that have documentary elements, or these disparate tones and styles clashing, but it felt perfect for this to have scratchy newsreel footage, or underexposed Vietnam War footage, or just some of the textures and the tones we really wanted to encompass and use as well as we could.
Can we talk a little bit about the production and how that all happened? Because I understand that there was like 20 days of live action shooting.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So did you already have like storyboards or concept drawings or anything when you kind of went into the shooting the live action shots?
I really hate storyboarding unless it's some big action sequence. I just don't. Been doing this too long. I don't want to feel confined to, I want to be inspired every day, and it's not a big deal to me to figure out how to shoot a scene. So but that said, you do have to have it designed. You don't have to have it built, but on a green screen, it had to be a measured set. It was very freeing in a way, and it was very constricting, to have our, scene built. Every shot we did was a live action, in live action was a special effect kind of thing. You felt like there were some parameters around it for sure, but it was fun though. It was really fun. If you look at our credits, we have what look like film credits, a whole film crew. It is a live action shoot. You you cast, you rehearse, you know, work through everything, and then you're in production and all the pressures and, you know, exhilaration and frustrations of that. And with this new added element, you know, Tommy's on the set, the I call, you know, all our people are there just kind of going, okay, well, you know, that's not going to work, or that, you know, so we're fitting the actors and the people in the frames over there. It was just new to me. I felt like I was making a big $100 million plus special effects movie. And it's really this intimate little story. So it was definitely, I learned a lot, actually. But there were times Tommy would say, you know, you just can't move the camera. If you move the camera like that, it's really tough to, that's going to be a tough animation. But if you move it like that, like, okay, you know, I was always trying to be practical, but.
Yeah. Well, it is, there's always different ways to do that. And again, I think you have to create the technology to fit around the storytelling of it. And knowing that Rick wasn't a big, huge fan of storyboards and stuff, we had to do some prep, of course, where there were some, you know, we had to do pre-visualizations for when we're shooting on the green screen. And this is very different than Waking Life or Scanner Darkly in that we shot on location. So what you see in there, that world was completely rotoscoped. So the backgrounds were there, they were all very practical, and then they were interpreted through roto later. This had none of that. So these are people literally on an empty stage, and we retroactively built the entire world around them. But in order to do that, when I sort of realized that we couldn't storyboard things, or that wasn't the best way to work, we used camera tracking in there. So we got an amazing amount of data. So anytime the camera moved, it was very clear how we'd do that. And that was perfect, because then Rick was able to be spontaneous on the set, and he could, you know, make decisions and really elicit the best things from the performers, instead of it sort of getting in the way or just being about the staging of the scene. And then we were able, with that data, we were able to really build that world around it afterward.
And we went really quickly. We had about a 6-week prep, which seems crazy. Most films, you know, you have everything prevised and designed, and but we had a very short pre-production, and we just knew we would build it all, you know, later. It would, the construction would come later, not in advance. So it was a little bit, you know, we had this attitude like, oh, we don't know, we'll figure it out, you know, that again, problem solving. We don't know, but yeah, no, we can do it. I don't know how, but we'll do it. You know, that was kind of the vibe.
It's not the preferred way to do that, and it's not the way that usually studios are comfortable with. It just turned out that that's the way it would happen for this film. But not knowing at the time that was actually a huge benefit for when we did start finalizing the design and things like that. We really understood the story much better than, say, just working from a script or from a few boards. We were able to really understand emotionally and tonally what we needed to do. So I think it really benefited from having that, you know, the period where you're designing stuff after you're deeper into the story.
Yeah, where you really understand, because I think if you have to do everything up front before there's been a human element of acting and the storytelling, or even editing the film and the music and the everything, the voiceover, it's hard to predict how it's going to feel. You know, it's going to be a little more lived in, a little more real. And we were always working from the reality of what we had, not some future theoretical a long time ago that we projected onto. So I don't know, it felt very organic and real to the piece. But you know, so we shoot that element, that 20 days, and then we edit like a regular film using whatever archival or whatever we can put around the actors, or something to aid the animators. You know, maybe it's a photo, maybe it's some newsreel, or, you know, as we were getting the TV. Yeah, text saying, okay, this is what that's going to be. And so the design phase was starting, and then we locked picture, and then it really started. If the animation came in waves, but once the big wave hit, it was like, okay, we are going. you know.
Before we talk a little bit about the animation wave, Richard, I wanted to ask you about the, working with actors in an area which is just green screen, something you hadn't done before. How does that change how you interact with your actors when there really is nothing for them to look at around them? Like, and you're working with kids. Like,
Yeah.
you have these kids running around the set. How does that change that?
I didn't feel any difference really. It's like kids are all make-believe anyway. So it's kind of like, okay, we're at the beach or we're on a playground and we're on the same green scene stage we've been for 2 weeks, 3 weeks. But they're like, yeah, okay, you're in bathing suits, you're running out in the water. And they would just run and okay, you run back. And I don't know, it's make-believe. It was fun. It was no pressure. We had enough time to do it correctly. And I don't remember it being ever feeling thwarted or disadvantaged by not being in a real, the real place. It's just a make-believe world we created that was really fun. It was fun. So I don't know. I enjoyed it.
So, okay, so let's talk a little bit about the animation wave. So you basically start with nothing, green screen, all these actors running around, and then now you have these words and images and videos that are starting to build the world around your characters and your story. How do you sort of start building the scenes? Because like you say, every scene is a visual effect. Mm-hmm. And how do you finally come to like the look of the project? Because I assume that, the first go or the first couple of scenes, you're still tweaking what it looks like. So, can you walk us through that process? And when you finally saw something or when you came across something, you said, okay, no, that's what it is. That's the look of the film. Or was there ever a moment like that? Maybe there wasn't, I don't know.
I think there's a little bit of, I think the benefit of our long relationship and having made a couple of animated films together, really, there's a trust there. I think as it starts out, it's very slow. I mean, I always think about it like, it's a layering process. It kind of never ends. You're kind of always going back, and it starts out, I think, with the character design, probably first and foremost, the one that really needs to be nailed. Going into that, style frames just for the scenes, and then you start building the backgrounds from that, and you start building through that. And I think the entire time, this was also during the pandemic, so none of us were together for the first time, making an animated film like so many people. And that just meant it was a lot of Zoom calls pretty much all day, going over these things and even the really banal stuff that, like all input, and just knowing Rick and just sort of seeing how he looks at something and how he responds to something always says something to me. And I think it's sort of it's a collaborative process, and you start molding it to that vision. And then it gets to a point where I think at some point I just sort of said like, okay, well, we're locking in now. Like if that's going to be it, that's how it's going to be. And there's also just production pressures from like, okay, you had to lock character design at this date. And it's like 2 days later, and I'm like, yeah, but can't we just have that? So you just go as far as you can until you have to move forward.
Yeah, it was the character design. But once we got that, and I felt everybody looked the way, they should look. And then once the details start rolling in, overall, I was always, I'd say the majority of the time, vast majority of the time, my expectations were always exceeded. I'm like, oh, that looks so cool. It's just so fun, from my perspective. It's like, oh, that TV looks so cool, looks real. I was always the number one fan of like, oh gosh, that looks great. And then if I'm kind of going, ooh, that's not how that looks, or just finding mistakes or things that are wrong. So I got to just be the picky guy going, oh, the baseball wouldn't bounce like that. All the things we had to imagine, it's just communication. It's communication and problem solving, and it's process. It requires the patience, and it's so incremental. And some things just take months and months. One little element, it's almost comical, like something so just so small. It's not the rocket ship. It's not the moon dust. It's the, you know, the baseball, the bologna sandwich, or the lettuce, or the, like, that doesn't look real to me. You know, it's just, you're just sitting there going, that outfielder, you know, so you're picking little details to death, and you feel like you're just being such a little picky, annoying person, but we're all on the page of getting it exactly right.
Yeah, that's animation. Animation are just those, you know, thousands of design decisions in every single frame. You know, that's like, if you don't have OCD, don't do animation.
Yeah. Yeah.
Can we talk a little bit about this 2.5D? That's a term that I've heard bantered around with the production of the film. What do you refer to when you're talking about this 2.5D?
I mean, it's a 2D project. So everything was animated in TV Paint, which is just an off-the-shelf animation suite. And it's 2D animation, but it's within a 3D environment. So we made a very conscious decision to not lean into technology, but to lean into creativity. And only if it became impossible to do did we kind of look at technology. So many times when films would have clearly used 3D, we would use parallax effect, you know, 2D on planes with, you know, and sort of giving that effect of depth and things like that. All of our, everything in it, all the ink and paint, the light, the shadows, special effects, everything was just traditional 2D hand drawn. You know, it was a completely bespoken production. And we did that because it's a period piece, and because it's really this era that was a very analog era. And because it was from, you know, a child's perspective, we wanted it to, you know, and knowing that we're making it with these digital tools, we wanted to have that analog feel. We wanted it to feel like it also came from that era and from that perspective. So we animated on twos, for instance, which very few people do now because it's easy. You know, when people animated in twos back then, they did that because of efficiency, because, you know, you're drawing. Now with 3D animation, you don't have to worry about that. You can do as many frames per second as you want. But for us, we are animating it like they were animating back then. And so twos became a really important tool, because that's half as many times I'm drawing your eyebrow, you know. So it was really to get that handmade feel primarily.
We talked a lot about that, just getting we talked about Saturday morning cartoons of that time. We talked about just, again, capturing that analog feel of the late 60s, and to not feel like we just didn't want it to look like every other animated film or feel too technologically based, although obviously it is. It's completely digital, of course, but it, you know, just to not feel that way. We were doing a little bit of a trick, you know.
Yeah. And inspired by the old Disney films, you know, Snow White and things like that. They used the parallax effect. They used referenced film, you know, when they were doing that. You know, it really was sort of looking at it and not looking. I mean, it's very tempting to use all these shiny toys and all that. And when we get to compositing, we did do that. So we are using really heavy compositing things, but really the approach was really to let the creativity be the main problem solver instead of computing power, algorithms, things like that.
Mm-hmm. I love every animator. You know, there are all these young people in Amsterdam and all over the world, and we're all communicating via Zoom. But I just love it when someone felt empowered enough to come with an idea, like an opening credit idea, or let me just try something. I'm like, yeah, sure. And then you look at it, it's like, oh, that's fantastic. That's a great idea. Let's do that. You know, so I don't know. It felt like just working with so many artists. They forever, just like, that's what I love about the collaborative nature of filmmaking. An actor will do something to surprise you, a composer will do something to surprise you, and an animator will definitely do something to surprise you in the best way possible. And you're like, oh, that's the best version that I could have ever imagined for that scene or that shot or how that looks. So it's a good feeling. That's when you're like, okay, we're done here. It's great. Let's composite, you know.
But
Whatever.
I expect it's a lot more difficult to have that sort of collaborative feel and energy when you're all sitting at home in front of a computer screen rather than together in a room where you're bantering ideas back and forth. Or maybe not.
It was definitely different. I think like everybody in the world, we were all on the same page as far as having to adjust to the pandemic, something that hadn't happened like this in 100 years. You know, we're like, okay. But the film industry and we've always adapted, you know, and it felt like that's what we were doing, you know, even editing. I'm in my library, my editor's at home. I'm not in the editing room, but we did it, you know, the technology was there. 10, 20 years ago, it would have been a disaster, but now it's like, oh no, we've got these tools. Let's make them work for us and not think so much about what we don't have, but let's think about what we do have, which is we can still communicate and be people, you know.
Tommy, can you talk a little bit about, you know, putting together your team of animators? Because I know that you worked with folks both in the US and in Amsterdam.
Yeah.
Was it difficult to find a team that could do the work that you guys wanted done, like to achieve the look of the film that you wanted to achieve?
Well, again, to sort of also build what the last things we were saying, I do think that collaborating with people that you've worked with before and have a history with really helped a lot through that entire period. And I think really the benefit of that, when things get tough, it really shows itself. So the core group of people on this film, on all aspects of it, from production to the animation, you know, the editing, everything, were people that we've known and worked with many times for many, many years. And that really helped. So there was a core team in place. The people, I worked at Submarine, based in Amsterdam, and Minnow Mountain, based in Austin, are again all people that I've worked with for well over a decade, if not longer. And for every project, you have to get new people, and they're, you know, both entities are just great at attracting talent. And you know, we've done projects that also luckily, you know, get the attention of certain people, and they come to us because there's not a heck of a lot of people who are doing animation the way that we're doing animation. And so people who like what we're doing tend to find us, and there's a sort of commonality there. You know, a lot of these people are doing things like this whole aesthetic really came from, it's a garage aesthetic. When, you know, we first started doing the rotoscope, it was done in our house with no money, you know, everything. And we're talking about like Waking Life was pretty humble. Waking Life was a $1.5 million movie when it came out. That's how much it cost. A feature animated film for 1.5, computer animated at that time. So we always had this sort of DIY aesthetic. And I think that we attract those type of people. And those kind of people that are doing it because of passion, not because it's the job that they want to do. It's because it fits in their vision, the way that they want to express themselves. And so we were very fortunate in finding a team through a pandemic, but it also, people were able to work remotely. And at first, like everybody else, we were super scared. Like, what does that mean? It turns out that it was fantastic. And you know, I wouldn't choose to do every single project that way, but I certainly will choose to do a hybrid from now on, because some people, you know, it allowed us to get talent that we wouldn't have been able to get if we were insisting that they come in. And so yeah, it was embarrassingly we had a lot to choose from, and we had great people that we found.
And Tommy, what does that look for you as the head of animation on the project on like a day-to-day basis?
Well, in this case, I was on Zoom for many, many hours, especially because of the time difference. For both, I was working in 3 time zones. So it looked like me sitting in a garage studio like I am right now in front of a computer screen, but just showing. But I mean, it's the benefit of it is that you just have, I mean, I don't know how many people were on this production, definitely over 100 in terms of the animation at any given time. And, you know, it's a management hierarchy thing. And hopefully you're only as good as the people who are working with you, you know, to that. So it's sort of a filter. I think like I'm the last filter, and then it goes to Rick, and then he's the final filter, you know. So it's a lot of looking at details, like Rick said, every single day, every single sort of design thing. And probably even more importantly, when we got into that, is just breaking it down and figuring out how to approach it. Like Rick said, there was sort of a radio play that was completed, and then we'd have to go out. So every single shot, every single scene, we had to figure out like, what is the best way to do this that makes sense, that we can do within the allotted time and the budget that we have, and the resources that are available to us. And we had to just create a workflow and a pipeline that allowed for flexibility in that. So it's not the way that most animation's done. Most animations have very strict workflows and pipelines, but we were able to build one that gave us more flexibility. And as we go, so we could sort of lean in where we needed to in the production.
You know, and this sounds kind of laborious or whatever, but keep in mind our process, this whole thing, what was it, a little over a year, you know? So this process from radio play nothing to final film is a little over a year. So that's pretty quick by animated feature standards too. So, you know, we're low budget, you know, but overall it's a quicker process. So I'm grateful for that.
You talked a little bit about the difficulty of trying to get like the perfect things perfect, like the lettuce doesn't look quite right, or the bologna doesn't look quite right. What would you say for each of you, perhaps as a different scene, what was the most difficult scene to capture?
I mean, correct. It was the ice on the bologna when he was talking about the frozen salmon. That was the challenge on that one. Every scene had its own cross to bear. I swear, like every scene had something about it that was like, you had to overly explain. Someone didn't understand. It felt like, you know, baseball to people in Amsterdam, they don't understand the sport, you know, every way balls bounce. And I don't know, it was fun. But I don't know, Tommy, do you have a scene that there's always one that just kind of drives you? We probably have different scenes. The one that kind of drove me, because we had the least reference for it, and inside it was the Alpine sleigh ride at Astroworld, because it was kind of a tunnel that, you know, no one's home movies or anything. We had pictures of the exterior of that amusement park mountain and some of the cars, but we didn't really have, I was just trying to explain what goes on once they go in the tunnel. And I don't know, it seemed like it just took forever, but to be expected. What was your least favorite scene, Tommy?
You know, I mean, I was always surprised at things that I thought were going to be super hard. And again, this really says, like, I thought the tunnel scene went great. I thought it was going to be much more difficult. And it was, I think, the helmet. So the helmet.
Oh, the helmet, the glass.
The helmet was 3D. So when we're shooting it, he doesn't have a glass helmet on or anything like that. And I knew that that was going to be complex because you're dealing with reflections. Like glass is always difficult in animation, and just because of the refractions and reflections and everything. And that turned out like, that was in my mind. I was like, okay, I know 3D, we're going to do that. How are we going to do that? And it was one of those things where I wasn't sitting there staring at them over their shoulders as they're doing it. But then when I started to see the first stuff back, I was like, this is perfect. I love it. It's great. It works so well. And I think the real challenge is, you know, as we're putting this all together, I mean, it's only in compositing where it really comes together and where you can really sort of make a judgment. So I was really leaning on experience for the most part of this project. And, you know, I think that we've been doing this for a long time, many decades and stuff. And I really learned to just sort of trust my instincts and go with that. And then, you know, see it come together in the compositing and to create that sort of, you know, pervasive world, to have that sort of consistency and to bring it all together in a believable way was just always so exciting to me. And there's an amazing amount of control that you have in the compositing process as well. Really just another sort of form of animation in itself, I believe.
Any happy accidents?
The pandemic, I would say. I mean, it's sort of weird because I think I sort of, and I suspect other people, I was so razor focused on this project because there was so little stimuli from the outside world at that time. And every time I did stick my head out, it was sort of like dark and the world was like falling apart. And I was happy to put my head back into this like candy colored, you know, time that was just sort of beautiful. And I didn't want it to end. I didn't want to go back to the real world. As we were
every day I was grateful. Every day I felt so grateful that to be working on this film, that we, our production, we wrapped about 3 days before the whole world shut down. They quit traveling, and like we wouldn't have, had we not been on that rush schedule, we would not have been in post during the pandemic. So I was just so grateful. And Jack Black said the same thing, because we would work on the narration, we'd do lines and he'd send me things and we'd talk, and he was just so happy, he said, to be doing this. He thought it was so fun. And everyone working on it said, and it was great to just be back 50 years at it, in this world, a positive world. The movie's really about a positive thing, a great engineering feat that the world, like we were all joined during this in like a horrible situation. A worldwide pandemic is as bad as it gets, maybe a world war would be worse, but it's really bad. And it's kind of the opposite of what we were showing in the movie. The time the whole world, 600 million people in the whole world could joined about a positive thing. It doesn't happen much. Probably the last time it's happened, that the whole world clustered around something that was an achievement we could all be proud of. Like, oh, wow, what that's an amazing achievement to put someone on the moon and travel back. And for the next couple decades, there's like, when your plumbing wasn't working, we can put a man on the moon, but we can't fix my plumbing. It was like, that was the, you heard that all the time. Like, we can put a man on the moon, but we can't figure out how to do traffic. So it was probably the greatest human achievement, ever, engineering wise anyway. But it was fun to be in what felt like a very positive world.
The technology, like, you've come a long way in 20 years of working in animation, and it seems that over the years, your films that turned out to be animated they've been animated for a very specific reason. Like, there's a reason why they're animated films and not live action feature films. But I'm curious if, now that you're kind of here and you have this technology, which is really pushing boundaries in a new and interesting way, do you feel the itch to write specifically for animation?
It depends on the project. I think if there was a story, something came to me that was screamed out animation, maybe, but I haven't. It doesn't seem to be the way it organically works. It's like a story that I'm kind of thinking of that, it could be animated. It kind of works that way. It doesn't really start that way. So, but I don't know. That's not a very good answer, but I wouldn't rule it out. I wouldn't rule it out, but I don't.
Well, this was
I'm not going through the world thinking, what's my next animated film? I gotta, what's the story?
And I'm kind of like, so when is the next animated film?
Yeah.
So tell me, what are you working on? I mean, this is clearly something that you've been sort of developing for a number of years, and I know that you're also doing Undone, which is amazing.
Thank you.
But sort of, where are you going with this?
Well, there's not a season 3 of Undone in production, so that's not going to happen. But I'm currently going to be doing animation for part of a documentary. So it's a documentary film, but about a third of it will be animated, which I've done before, and I really enjoy that. And again, it's that subjectivity that you can go to, and that's sort of the realism. And that one will have rotoscoping, but he's even going to step further away from that and go more traditional 2D animation. I think I'm going to start an experimental short, which I haven't done in probably 20 years. Partly just from looking at and Rick was saying this the other day, how the Oscar nominated shorts are always very imaginative, and the features are kind of more the family films. And I've just been seeing a lot of shorts that have been very inspiring. And I thought, like, the thing about the shorts is you can fail, right? You can just try all out. Again, the expectations are very low. You can really be as experimental as you want to be. And that's very appealing to me. So that's probably in my cards. And I think in terms of animation, the real question mark for me is clearly AI is going to be the biggest disruptor of the animation industry. And I think that might happen sooner rather than later. And so I'm very excited how that's going. And I've been spending a lot of time kind of playing around in that arena to understand what the capabilities are and also what the pitfalls are, of that.
Very, very interesting. Wow. So, I mean, congratulations to you both. A Pallotta and a Half is so much fun, and it feels like such a lived-in movie. Feels both new and old. I saw it twice over the
Good.
holidays, and it's amazing how the second time around you kind of pick up on things that you missed the first time. So it's this little gem of a movie that just I can only imagine that in 20 years it's going to look just like Waking Life or Skyner Darkly looks now, which is it still feels like it's something new, even though it's old, which is kind of amazing.
Yeah, it'll forever be a document of a place and a time that it was 50 years ago, plus now it's going to be 70 years, but it'll always be. And that's what kind of, that's what I felt the urgency to make it about that. It's like, oh, I lived through an interesting time. Let's make a film about a place and time and a feeling, and it was fun to mix the grandness of that achievement and all that with the kind of just utter ordinariness of suburban life, and to clash those two things, grandiosity of that greatest human achievement ever with just bland, human life at a time. So I thought I love history like that.
Well, it's wonderful. So congratulations to you both. It really is a lot of fun. Can't wait to see what's coming next for both of you.
Well, we hope to be talking to you, in the coming years on something cool, but
I expect so.
that would be fun. Yeah.
Oh, thank you both. It really has been a lot of fun.